Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Curitan, Executive Director of the New Jersey Historical Commission, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the next offering in our new webinar series, Black is African American History and Sites in New Jersey. Now, as 2021 comes to a close with all its challenges, the long-awaited reestablishment of our African American History program has been a source of great inspiration and hope for us at the Commission. New Jersey has been a diverse place for centuries. The stories of the African Americans who lived here and shaped this place are essential to our understanding of New Jersey today. We are fortunate to be able to explore one of those stories tonight as our terrific panel of speakers share the history of Lawnside, New Jersey's first incorporated Black town. Our moderator tonight is Noelle Lorraine Williams, the director of the Commission's African American History Program. Noelle joined our staff in March of this year, and this new webinar series is just one of the impactful programs that she is already working on. Stay tuned for much more in the days to come. But first, it's my honor to welcome New Jersey's Secretary of State, Tahisha Way. As Secretary of State, Ms. Way holds one of the nation's oldest constitutional offices and leads a department with a diverse portfolio. She serves as New Jersey's top election official, overseeing the state's Division of Elections and its work in securing our democracy and ensuring broad, fair access to the right to vote. In addition to this critical work, Ms. Way also oversees the state government offices supporting New Jersey's vibrant arts, culture, history, and business communities. Now, throughout her career, Secretary Way has devoted herself to public service. Prior to becoming Secretary of State, she was an administrative law judge for the state of New Jersey. In 2006, she was elected to the Passaic County Board of Chosen Freeholders and served as the Freeholder Director in 2009. Now, I want to also add that we have a deep debt of gratitude that we must acknowledge and owe to Secretary Way, because it's been her great and unflagging support for the African American History Program that really has enabled us to move forward and reestablish it this year. So our thanks to you, Secretary Way, and welcome to tonight's program.
Thank you, Sarah, and good evening. And of course, welcome to the third program hosted by the New Jersey Historical Commission in the series, Black is African American History and Sites in New Jersey. Tonight's program will explore the history of New Jersey's first incorporated Black town, Lawnside. Previous programs focused upon Juneteenth and slavery and freedom in 18th and 19th century New Jersey. These panels featured community members like you who are contributing to the history and daily life of New Jersey in our schools, our churches, and historical sites. As New Jersey's Secretary of State, I am honored to lead a department that includes this commission, and I am especially proud to oversee the reinstatement of the African American History Program after it had been dormant for more than a decade. With renewed vigor, the Historical Commission is working to amplify the public knowledge of the dynamic history and resilience of African American sites and heritage in New Jersey. Through programming, events, research, and community assistance. Whether you are here because you are a member of the Lawnside community, you're interested in New Jersey or Black history specifically, we are so thankful you've joined us today. We hope you'll learn something new and share it with your friends, your neighbors, and loved ones. Now, if you are interested in learning more after tonight, about Lawnside and other historic African American locations, they are indeed featured on the state's Black Heritage Travel and Tourism site, which and I know Sarah and Noelle encourage you all to visit. Lastly, I must thank Noelle Lorraine Williams, the director of the African American History Program at the Commission, and Director Sarah Curitan for their work throughout the year and on this program to ensure that New Jersey's history tells stories that truly reflect our communities. Thanks again for all who are joining. And without further ado, let's get to the program. It's all yours, Noelle.
Thank you, Secretary Way. Good evening, everyone. My name is Noelle Lorraine Williams. And again, I'm the director of the African American History Program here at the New Jersey Historical Commission. I am pleased to present this program, Lawnside, New Jersey's first incorporated Black town, with Lawnside residents Linda Shockley, Ellen Benson, and Muneerah Higgs. For more than 200 years, African Americans in the North have fought for political power, economic freedom, and voting rights by buying land, building homes, establishing churches, schools, and civic organizations. Lawnside, New Jersey is a powerful example of this vision as New Jersey's first incorporated municipality governed by descendants of enslaved and free African Americans. Please, thank you for joining us to learn more about this vibrant community that still thrives despite the state's Jim Crow past and other challenges. Now, I will introduce to you our first panelist, Linda Shockley.
Good evening. Thanks so much, Noelle. I appreciate you and Sarah Curitan, as well as the Secretary of State. It really is an honor for us to be presenting this program this evening. So thank you so very much.
Sure. And if I may, I would like to share with everyone Linda's bio so you can learn a little bit more about her background. Linda P. Shockley is president and a founding member of the Lawnside Historical Society in Lawnside, New Jersey, where she learned the unique history of the town shaped and governed by African Americans. The society restored and owns the Peter Mott House Underground Railroad Museum, named for an agent on that clandestine network to freedom for those escaping enslavement. She served as the Secretary of Preservation New Jersey, a statewide historic preservation advocacy group, a commissioner of the Camden County Cultural and Heritage Commission, and member of the New Jersey Review Board for Historic Sites. She was a Getty Diversity Scholar through the National Trust for Historic Preservation. She is a deacon at Grace Temple Baptist Church, Lawnside, where she co-chairs the Black History Ministry. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Linda Shockley.
Thanks so much. I'm going to start my presentation. I hope to share my screen with you. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. So the Lawnside Historical Society was organized in 1990. And we came together out of a sense of crisis. We've always known our history here in Lawnside, and we were taught by our teachers, many of whom were descendants of people who had escaped to the community or who settled in the community. And we also had the benefit of Dr. Roscoe L. Moore, who was our school doctor, but who was also an archivist. And one of the things that Dr. Moore told us about every Black History Week throughout our elementary school career was about the history of the town. It just so happened that he was related to a man named Charles Smiley. Mr. Smiley published a book in 1921 called A True Story of Lawnside. And in it, he talked about our origins as a community of people who had come out of slavery, escaped, had been manumitted, and settled in this little area, which was actually called Snow Hill. And in the book he wrote, it was a place of freedom to an oppressed people, so much so that they thanked, with thankful hearts, they called it Free Haven. And so much of what we know came from Mr. Smiley's book. It's only 32 pages. It was written in 1921, and it is the only book solely written about Lawnside. Other people have included information about Lawnside in books about South Jersey history, but this was a book solely dedicated to Lawnside's history. As I mentioned, Mr. Smiley was related to our town doctor and school doctor, Roscoe L. Moore. And as a result of Dr. Moore's affection for collecting historical memorabilia, we actually have the little letters and envelopes that Mr. Smiley sent around to people in the community soliciting information about their families, their papers, their records, their deeds and old diaries, newspapers, anything that would shed some light on the origins of our community. So we're indebted to him, and we're also indebted to Dr. Moore. Now, Mr. Smiley was also a genealogist, and he was able to trace his family's origins from people who were manumitted in Maryland and then migrated to New Jersey. Now, Lawnside was known as Snow Hill at one point. And so there's this connection where people are trying to find out how exactly we are connected, if at all, to Snow Hill, Maryland. And that's a question that we hope people will want to research down through the years. So Lawnside was incorporated by an act of the legislature in 1926. And what you see here is a draft of the second copy of the Assembly bill that established the community as an incorporated municipality in March 1926. The letter line on this section of the bill indicates that 30 days after the governor signs the law making Lawnside a separate municipality, the county clerk must impanel an election. And that was done in April of 1926. And the photograph that you see is of the gentlemen who were elected to the council. Now, this is another great area for research and to find out information about the town, because there is some thought that these men actually had to travel to and meet with people in Trenton to talk about how the community would be formed and what the parameters would be for it. The gentleman in the center, who's bald, is the first mayor, and his name is James Hemming, and we have a Hemming's Way in Lawnside named for him. There are members of council and also the tax collector and the borough clerk. The borough clerk is a gentleman who appears on the left of the picture with the Stetson hat. He is Horace Bryant. He was the first African-American calendar clerk for the New Jersey State Assembly in the 1930s. He was also the father of our school board president subsequently, and also of one of our mayors and State Senator Wayne R. Bryant. So the family lineages here in the community also include Charles Cooper, who was the son of a man whose freedom was purchased for him by a family from Haddonfield. We're bounded by Haddonfield, Tavistock, Barrington, Magnolia, and Cherry Hill. Interestingly enough, in 1927, the Courier Post published an article that the community had survived its first year, having spent just a little bit over $5,600, and that the school system and the churches and all the municipal elements of government were populated by people who were boosters for their community and believed in unity. So it was nice to see an article that seemed favorable at 1927. In 1933, we would see another article where Woodcrest Heights residents, which was a section bordering on Cherry Hill, actually wanted to secede from the town, and there were allegations of racism and cross burnings. And Mr. Bryan actually stood up at a public hearing and warned people that cross burnings would not be tolerated. Fortunately for us, we had that information from news articles, a great source of research for historians. And we actually reprinted those articles in 1990 at a Black History program. So here's where Lawnside originated from. This is a map showing Center Township, and I've shown you Snow Hill, and the second arrow points to the Peter Mott property as it was situated then. It is now hard by the New Jersey Turnpike. Turnpike installation just missed the Mott House, so we're fortunate that it was intact and it's in the original location. In 1907, the name of the town was changed to Lawnside to coincide with the train station. And if you'll notice, there's a plot of land marked Lawnton. The railroad coming out from Philadelphia actually stopped there, and the stop was called Lawnside because the conductor would say, the station stop, get out on the Lawnton side. So it was eventually shortened, just Lawnside, and the town adopted that name. So this is just a picture of the Peter Mott House. We are on the National Register of Historic Places. We were placed in 1994. We were fortunate to get informational signs installed by the New Jersey Historic Trust, and the Pomeroy Foundation provided us with the National Register marker. We just celebrated the 31st anniversary of the Historical Society, and it was actually also the 20th anniversary of the opening of the Peter Mott House in October of 2021. So we opened in 2001 with a program, and we're fortunate and blessed to still be here. So who was Peter Mott? Where did he come from? And what is it that he did? I think he might have been born between 1807 and 1810. He lived as a free Black man. He married Elizabeth Ann Thomas in 1832 in Gloucester County, as Camden County did not exist until 1844. We believe he built his house in 1845. And if we look through records and deeds, we'll see that Peter was busy making transactions with people in the area. So if we look at a deed, we'll see Charles Watkins was one of the persons who purchased property from him, and we have a Watkins Avenue. He sold property to a Mr. Haney, and we have a Haney Avenue. So he was important in developing land in the area. His wife was Elizabeth Ann Thomas. His brother-in-law was Stephen Thomas, and we have a Thomas Avenue just across from Peter Mott's home. So he's a very important figure in that regard, but most of all, we're focused on his role in the Underground Railroad, and that's why we call our house the Peter Mott House Underground Railroad Museum. As such, oral tradition tells us that he carried people in his wagon to the Quakers in Haddonfield and Morristown. And that is pretty much the gist of what we know about him. We know that the African Methodist Episcopal Church was significant as a conduit through the Underground Railroad. And so many of those preachers Peter, following in that tradition, is part of that. However, we don't have written documentation about him satisfactory to the point where we can publish more information. So we really need people who are interested in doing that kind of research to help us in that regard. We would love to have more information about him. This is his death certificate. It's one of the more concrete documents that we have about him. Fortunately for us, in doing the research for our National Register nomination, Gail Greenberg found his death certificate in the state archives, and it shows that Peter died in November of 1881, and he was attended by the funeral director, who was Edward Miller, the originator of the Miller Funeral Home, which is a very well-known funeral home in South Jersey that was started in about the 1840s. We believe the Millers came here from a southern state. Edward and his wife, Sarah, who was a school teacher, and the person who really directed the funeral programs, Edward was more of the carpenter who made the coffins, actually handled Peter's burial. And he was buried in the Snow Hill Church Cemetery, which is now the Mount Pisgah AME Church Cemetery. Interestingly enough, Secretary of State Regina Thomas in 2002 did an Underground Railroad walk across New Jersey, and she stopped in Lawnside. She stopped at Peter Mott's house, and then on the second day of her visit here, she stopped at Mount Pisgah Church and symbolically laid a wreath in the cemetery to represent where we think Peter may have been buried. So we are really in search of more information, and we need assistance from professional historians, genealogists, and researchers who can help them put more meat on this heroic man's bones so that people know more about the work that he did. So I thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that presentation, Linda. I'm sure people will have questions at the end. And thank you. I will now introduce our next panelist, Muneerah Higgs. Muneerah Higgs is a member of the Lawnside Historical Society. She also produced the video Lawnside, The Haven to Freedom, amongst other films about Black history. She received the New Jersey Historical Commission's Mildred Berry Garvin Prize for recognition of excellence in teaching African-American history. She was chosen by the County of Camden Board of Chosen Freeholders as a Women's History Month honoree for writing curriculum on Lawnside's history, receiving an Emmy nomination for work on New Jersey's Education's Classroom Close-Up television show for production of the Soweto Uprising, which came out of her travels to South Africa, among other accomplishments already mentioned. She's the proud mother of 2 children, Hakeem and Sakina, and grandmother to Samir and Harrison. She's a retired educator, videographer, historian, Rutgers University Fulbright Scholar, former consultant, and presently the Amistad curriculum writer for the New Jersey Education Association. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in education from Glassboro State College and a master's degree in school counseling from Wilmington University. Thank you, and I would like to present Muneerah Higgs.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And thank you, the New Jersey Historical Commission, for this opportunity for us to share this history with you. What I'm going to do is give you a little background information about myself and my teaching career in Lawnside. And then I'm going to share some of the lessons that I taught to my students about the history of Lawnside. Now, Linda already talked about I grew up here in Lawnside, first of all. I went to school here and I taught for 32 years. Now, that old dilapidated house sat in that field for many, many years, and we didn't pay it any mind. As a matter of fact, my auntie said she lived in the house, but we didn't pay it any mind. And Mr. Still, a resident of Lawnside, Clarence Still, found out the information that it was a stop on the Underground Railroad, and Mr. Peter Mott was a conductor on the Underground Railroad, and he used his house as a safe place for escaped Africans traveling north to freedom in the 19th century. Now, we found out about the Peter Mott House, and then we found other historic places here in Lawnside that were important. They included such places as Mount Peace Cemetery, Mount Pisgah Church, and Mount Zion United Methodist Church. And then as I did more research, I found similar histories that were similar to Lawnside, places in New Jersey that were stops on the Underground Railroad also. Cape May, Sadlertown, excuse me, Timbuktu, Mount Laurel, Boomtown, Patterson, just to name some of the places. So we also learned about all these brave men and women, Harriet Tubman, John Brown, William Still, just to name a few. So being a social studies teacher, I knew that it was my duty to teach my students of Lawnside this proud, rich history. So once I gathered all of this information together, I started to write lesson plans based on the findings, and I taught them as a part of my curriculum. And then what I did, I took those lessons and put them together, and I developed a curriculum guide on the history of Lawnside for the Lawnside School District. I produced 3 videos, and I think you mentioned a couple of them, and I used them in the classroom also. It was Lawnside, the Haven to Freedom, The Best Kept Secret, and On Mount Peace. I was also given a fellowship to Independence National Park, where I produced a unit called Contributions Made by African Americans During the Revolutionary Era in Philadelphia. And I found a whole free society over there in Philadelphia, Absalom Jones, Richard Allen, and I also found out some truths about Thomas Jefferson, which I also included in my lessons. Now, as a young person, I also lived through the civil rights movement, and I was involved in fighting for social justice. I had to share these experiences with my students. I remember in high school, we had a sit-in. We were fighting for Black history books. Just 50 years later, we're doing the same thing. And we threw our books on the stage and we sat in all night long protesting because we didn't have Black history in our books. Then I remember Dr. King got killed, and we left the school. We marched out the school, marched down in Camden, down on Broadway, and we were marching, and the police surrounded us with billy clubs, and they were hitting people. And it was a famous Jersey Joe Walcox, a famous boxer. I was getting ready to get hit in the head with a billy club, and Jersey Joe saved my head from getting hit. I remember being on a bicycle, stopping in my town of Lawnside on a corner, and 4 white boys spat out the window, put their heads out the window and spat in my face and rode off laughing. I remember going to North Carolina with my dad and seeing these signs that said, whites only. And Daddy would just say, let's just keep moving. We can't stop here. So, you know, I remember the civil rights movement. I remember Rap Brown came to Camden, Stokely Carmichael, Marcus Garvey. I remember the Birmingham bombings and those 4 little girls that were killed. I remember the children's crusades that carried the movement on. All of these experiences became a part of my lesson plans, and they helped to shape who I am today. Now, as my teaching career continued, I think it was mentioned that I was blessed by Rutgers University to be awarded a Fulbright scholarship to South Africa to teach in the wine vineyards. What a life-changing experience. While I was there, we were studying about the Soweto uprisings, and it reminded me of the Children's Crusades, because you know the children picked up the weight when the movement started falling apart. They went to the children here in America, and they had similar experiences. They were beat up, they fought for civil rights, they fought for social justice. So what I did was I developed a unit comparing and contrasting to the two, and also used them in my classroom. I produced a podcast for Camden County of Underground Railroad sites throughout the county, which I also used in my lessons. So through all of this research, I was noticing that there was some untruths in these history books that I was using. I said, wait a minute, some of this it's not true. So I wanted to dispel the myths and tell the truth so that we had to have discussion. So I provided a space where we could talk about the injustices and the untruths that were being written in these books about African Americans and minorities in our communities. I had to talk about A Birth of a Nation, and which it being a part of the reason that people went on that great migration. I had to talk about white privilege being embedded in the laws and the institution. And Ahmaud Arbery is I hate to go off the topic for a second, it's a perfect example of that citizen's arrest, which was established. It was a law that was established back in 1863, which was basically to catch fleeing slaves. So that's a perfect example of the systematic racism that we talk about. I had to have a conversation about the legal and illegal efforts to prevent voters from voting. I had to talk about how whites justified slavery by saying that Black people had inferior brains. I had to talk about Christopher Columbus discovering America. Come on, people were already here. I had to tell them how he started the colonization of America. I had to talk about Abraham Lincoln. Was he really that great emancipator, or was he trying to save the Union? I had to talk about Thomas Jefferson having children with his slave, Sally Hemings. And I had to talk about the Declaration of Independence when it says, all men are created equal. Is that really true here in America? So I just had to dispel these myths and tell the truth. So you see, this is and was my passion. So now I would like to share with you some of the lessons that I taught my children at Lawnside School. We start out with the history of education in Lawnside. Educating children has always been a major priority since our foreparents came here on the Underground Railroad. Over the years, there have been some changes. You see the first, I'm going to talk about the little house that you see there. The first forms of education, though, were in the churches. They learned to read the Bible, and some people taught people in their homes for a small fee. But in 1848, a group of Quakers, including a Mr. Borger, wanted to build a school in Lawnside for colored children. So a Black landowner, get this, Jacob C. White, sir, was a Black landowner, and he gifted a plot of land for $1 so that small frame school was built. And they were taught reading, writing, and arithmetic. Then in the early 1900s, a 4-room frame structure was built. All the students attended there, and they were taught like just basic courses. Lawnside also had an industrial school. It opened inside of the public school, and also the borough business took place in there. It was like the do-all building in the community. But attendance increased at the public school, so they had to move the industrial school down to what we call Odd Fellows Hall. The boys were taught how to repair shoes, harnesses, and hammocks, and the girls were taught how to sew. Now, later on in 1915, a 4-room brick building with a basement was built, and there were additions added on later. You can see that building right here on the slide. The school became overcrowded, and a middle school was built in 1976 for grades 6 through 8th. Attendance dropped at the elementary school, and then everybody started coming to the middle school. So now that's Lawnside Public School. Our high school students go to Haddon Heights High School, Camden County Vocational School, or private schools. My memory of Lawnside School was we'd have May Day, and we'd make these little crepe paper skirts, and we'd all dance around the maypole and just have a very good time. And what you're seeing on the screen here is one of those rooms in that last building that was built in the school. It's the library. So that is my lesson about the Lawnside Public School and the history of it. The next thing I would like to talk about, the next lesson that I taught my children was about Mount Peace Cemetery. Now in South Jersey during the late 19th century, there were very few cemeteries for African Americans. Well, Mount Peace grew out of that need. It was established by a group of African American men who formed the Mount Peace Cemetery and Funeral Directing Company in 1902. Buried there, they have Civil War soldiers, Spanish American War, World War I, soldiers of the Korean conflict, all the way up to the Vietnam War. And a group of men from the Lawnside Men's Association they crawled around in the graveyard and found 108 soldiers and sailors buried there. We also have a special person buried there. His name is U.S. Navy Landsman John Lawson, a Medal of Honor recipient. He was in the Battle of Mobile in 1866, and he was thrown against a ship and his leg was injured, and they were going to take him to sick bay. But Mr. Lawson said, no, I'm not going to sick bay. I'm going to continue to fight. So he continued in the battle and he became a Medal of Honor recipient, and he is buried at Mount Peace Cemetery. According to the Haddonfield Historical Society, between 1931 and 1959, the cemetery received the remains of 3,557 people. So a group of citizens came together to form the Mount Peace Cemetery Association Incorporated, and is now maintained by them. So that is our special. Lots of the my sister's buried there. A lot of the graves have not been uncovered yet, and we're hoping to find my sister's grave one day. And that was my lesson about Mount Peace Cemetery. And I have one more lesson to give you here, one more. And this is about a very, very special place in Lawnside. It was called Lawnside Park. Well, back in the 1920s to the 1950s, residents of Lawnside, we weren't allowed in places such as Clementon Park, which is a park close to our home, because of segregation and discrimination. We had to go to Axion Park in Pittman. And we could only go there for church picnics, and then you could only go there on Thursdays. But that didn't bother the residents of Lawnside. They had one of the best, most visited parks in New Jersey, and it was known as Lawnside Park. Originally, it was used for churches that had meetings, picnics, and they had baptisms in the beautiful lake that was located there. Families would also come and enjoy the park too. Now, Mr. Willis, he purchased this land and he built the park between the years 1924 and 1950. Now, listen, you're going down this street called Easham Avenue. It's lit up on the weekends. It contained a beautiful playground, picnic tables, pavilions, a Ferris wheel, rented boats, horse and buggy rides, a flying swing, a skating rink, and the most spectacular carousel you ever saw. This place even had a tea room and a clubhouse and a pool hall. Now, over the lake on the other side of the bridge was a baseball stadium with a covered grandstand. This place was something else during those times. Now, around 1951, someone purchased a liquor license and the park began to change from the old Lawnside Park. It became more of an adult entertainment place. It became the center of entertainment throughout the tri-state area. I can remember busloads of people coming from everywhere, Pennsylvania, Delaware, New York, Virginia, all over. And you can see in these pictures some of the bars that were open. Club Harlem is over there, Dreamland, Cotton Club, Coochie's, or Wilcox's as we call it, the Whippoorwill. And these people are in some of these clubs, in Club Harlem. No, Linda told me which club they were in, but I'm not sure. Okay, now I think they were in Harris's. So yeah, these were some of the clubs that opened. And we had popular entertainers that came to not only to entertain, but they came to socialize, such as Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan. There were also rows of stands. You coming down the street, it's just lit up. Stands everywhere. They sold food, trinkets, souvenirs, games of chance, and barbecue pits sprung up everywhere. And then we became known for Lawncide's famous barbecue. Everybody knows about Lawncide's famous barbecue. There were other eating places such as Hilly Seafood, Jerry's Barbecue Pit, and Harris's Barbecue Pit. There were other clubs also existing in Lawnside. They were the Acorn Inn, Loretta's Hi-Hat Club, and Pearl Celebrity Room. Now, to top all that off, Lawnside also had a motorcycle racetrack, KD Speedway. I can remember on the weekend, you would hear the motorcycles just coming through the town, coming through, loads of them, going to KD Speedway to race their motorcycles. Now, all good things must come to an end. So by the 1980s, the Lawnside Park began to close down. The clubs in Atlantic City opened up and people started going there. So ended the era of Lawnside Park. I just remember sitting on the ledge. I couldn't get into the clubs, but I sat on the ledge and watched the people having a wonderful time. It was a phenomenal time in Lawnside. So these are just some of the lessons that I shared with my students. I enjoyed watching my students' faces light up with pride as we made history come alive in the classroom. The students developed brilliant, exciting ways to show what they learned about the history. I called them performance tasks. They danced, they sang, they made dioramas, they made maps. We visited places, we acted, we wrote. We went to the Peter Mott house. We went to the archaeological dig there. Now, they didn't just make a visit. They had to critique what they learned when they got back to the classroom. We created a play based on my trip to South Africa called Serafina. We created a video, as Noelle mentioned, called The Soweto Uprising, which was nominated by the New Jersey Education Classroom Close-Up TV show for an Emmy. It didn't win, but we were nominated. And the students, in conjunction with the Lawnside Historical Society, produced a Tell Your Story oral history projects. The students studied, they researched, they interviewed residents, and they captured the stories of growth and development of this town. These are just some of the creative ways that the students developed as we learned about this history. So I retired and I'm in the process of rewriting this curriculum, right, of Lawnside. I wanted to do it again, write it better, and I wanted to write a book on the history of Lawnside, which I thought would be a great place to contain all of this knowledge that I had. So I'm reading the NJEA review, New Jersey Education Review. And they said in there, Amistad curriculum writers want it. I'm like, wow, this is just what I'm doing. This is what I'm looking for, right curriculum. I was familiar with the Amistad mandate and I had taught it in my classroom. So if chosen to do this curriculum, I could include this history into it. I could share this with the students throughout the state. I could share the history of Lawnside, the civil rights movement, African-American history, the same things that I had taught my students. This was a perfect way to bring this history back alive. So I applied and they hired me to be one of the designers to write the African-American history curriculum. So I think I was blessed. So in conclusion, I just wanted my students to understand that age doesn't matter, that they can also be courageous and fight for social justice. I wanted to create a safe space where they could evaluate the society, the culture, the politics, and the history, and become critical thinkers. I wanted to create a space where they could question things that seemed distorted and challenge them. I wanted them to know that they could also be a catalyst for change. This history is American history. Without it, American history is incomplete and is inaccurate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Muneerah Higgs, for that powerful talk an almost testimony of the breadth of African-American life in Lawnside, but also your journey towards becoming an educator and enabling the community to learn more about our national and international history, as well as our local history here in New Jersey. And again, I commend you and Dr. Shockley for all of the work, and Mrs. Benson, as we'll hear, in working to educate the community wherever you are, the various communities.
Thank you, Noelle. Thank you so much. My pleasure.
So I will now introduce Mrs. Ellen Jackson Benson. Ms. Benson has lived in the Lawnside area all of her life. She attended Lawnside Public School, Haddon Heights High School, and she attended Temple University until she was hired full-time as a clerk at the Lawnside Post Office. After 3 years, she was appointed postmaster. She increased the Lawnside's postal services profitability, upgrading its status. Then in 1960, she oversaw the construction of a new post office, which stands at Warwick Road and Emlyn Avenue. She set up home mail delivery in 1969 and personally developed the 4 zip code numbers for each Lawnside address. She retired after 35 years of service. Mrs. Benson also worked faithfully for 15 years as administrative assistant and personal secretary to the Reverend Dennis L. Blackwell of Asbury United Methodist Church in Woodland, New Jersey. Mrs. Benson has worked tirelessly within the African Methodist Episcopal Church, starting as a member of Mount Pisgah AME in Lawnside, where she returned upon her husband's retirement. She was married to the Reverend James A. Benson for 58 years until his passing in 2013, and served as First Lady of the congregations he pastored. Together, they mentored several younger pastors and their spouses. Mrs. Benson comes from one of the oldest families in Lawnside, and surrounding area and community service is a part of her family heritage. Her father, Johnny Jackson, was mayor of Lawnside for 8 years, starting in 1948. Her uncles, aunts, and other family members have worked as teachers and principals, clergymen, and government officials. Mrs. Benson worked for a time as a news editor and headline writer for the Lawnside Chronicle, the town's newspaper in the 1950s. Mrs. Benson was a member of the Lawnside Scholarship Club for 40+ years, serving in many capacities, including president. A lover of history, Mrs. Benson helped her husband, an avid archivist, direct the Benson History Museum that was located in Lawnside. It was a repository of books, artifacts, articles, and photographs documenting the multicultural experience that has shaped our world. The museum was open to the public until storms heavily damaged the building. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Ellen Benson. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Nicole. I too want to thank the New Jersey Historical Commission for this opportunity to talk about Lawnside. And my bio tells quite a bit of what I was going to talk about. So it might be some repeats, but I'll certainly be within my time. I want to first say that this is an honor to be able to talk about my family, the Jacksons, one of the oldest families in the area. I want to tell you about their involvement in Lawnside's history and community development. The Jacksons were among the first Black people who came out of those log cabin type homes that had been hidden behind high trees, concealing them from slave catchers in the late 1700s and early 1800s. These people who came from there were the beginning of Mount Pisgah Church. You'll see on the screen On the right is the second Mount Pisgah Church, which was built in 1868. And the one on the left is the present edifice, which was built in 1911. In Mr. Charles Smiley's book that Linda talked about, A True Story of Lawnside, he tells how Mr. Boger of Haddonfield and Mr. Jacob C. White of Philadelphia built a small frame school on Mott Street, and it was called For Colored Children. Two of the teachers there were Mrs. Mary B. Jackson and Mr. Joseph Jackson, my great uncle. This was around 1848. In the late 1900s and up until around 1920, my great-grandfather, John H. Jackson, was the assessor for Center Township before Lawnside became incorporated as a borough. Miss Sarah Jane Brown is reported to have seen him walk by every day in a suit and tie and a high hat carrying a briefcase where he was walking to Magnolia, Belmar, Runnymede, Mount Ephraim, Barrington, and Tavistock, and then back to Lawnside. And even though most of those towns were all white and racially charged, I'm told he was highly respected. You will see on the screen a copy of a 1900 census form signed by John Howard Jackson. He was the enumerator for Snow Hill, which was still part of Center Township, which included all those towns I named. He was also a local preacher and Sunday school superintendent at Mount Pisgah, which was still called the Snow Hill Church. John H. and Susan Davis Jackson had 9 children, 6 boys and 3 girls. One of the sons was Joseph, the teacher that we talked about in the school above. And another son, John Howard, was known all over New Jersey as an educator and as an ordained itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. This is his picture on the side of the screen. This is also the picture that is hanging in Lawnside School now. He was a principal at Lawnside Elementary when the new brick building with 4 large classrooms was opened in 1919. That it was on Mansion Avenue then, it's Warwick Road now. And later he was principal at the Charles C. Sumner School in Camden. He was given credit for working so very hard with the students and getting them to stay in school and graduate, which happened. The first graduation was in 1910. Up until then, the students had not finished. Another son, Albert Peter, who was my grandfather, held many positions in Mount Pisgah Church, the oldest church in Lawnside. He was a longtime trustee, but mainly known as the choir director for over 50 years. Mount Pisgah's music was strongly influential with the other local churches in Lawnside and in the Camden-Trenton area. He was also a member of a band, which you will see on the screen. Albert Peter, he's the tall man on the left on the back row. And they played for dances, civic affairs, and in churches. My grandfather's skills as a carpenter were very evident in the Lawnside, Haddonfield, and Haddon Heights area in the buildings and houses that he built. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see an agreement that I have. I have a copy of the original with the Lawnside Fire Department for him to build their first fire hall for $140 in 1916. That building is still standing on the corner of Hodges and Warwick Roads. The importance of education has always been stressed in my family. A. Peters' daughters, Edna Jackson Jay and Madge Jackson Mitchell, both left indelible marks on Lawncide's educational history, teaching there for many years. Edna served as a principal at one time, and that's the picture you see. In Lawnside, it was a custom that the morning after the 8th grade graduation, they would stand on the front steps and take pictures. She's the one in the middle as serving as the principal. Madge is on her right, and on the her other side is one of the teachers who became one of our mayors, Walter Gaines. Edna's son, Howard J. Jr., who was a product of the Lawnside school system, was the first African-American principal in the Vineland, New Jersey school system. Madge's granddaughter, Paula Mitchell Davis, taught math at the Lawnside school, the same as her grandmother for many years. Before retiring, Paula was the director of curriculum there. At this time, two of Paula's daughters, Antoinette and Chantel Davis, also teach in the Lawnside School District. A. Peters' daughter, Gladys Jackson, served as a missionary for over 60 years and as a Sunday school teacher for over 38 years in Mount Pisgah Church. A. Peters' son, John Albert Jackson, who was my father, was a carpenter by trade, taught by his father, whom he accompanied on jobs when he was old enough. In 1950, John became the mayor of Lawnside. When he won, the Republican Club held a big victory banquet at the High Hat, and that's what you'll see on the right side of the screen. Back then, the Republicans and Democrats were strong, civic-minded people who met regularly trying to better the community. I remember the Republican Club met in a cement block basement in the backyard of Mr. and Mrs. Henry Williams on the corner of Gloucester Avenue and White Horse Pike. And that's a picture that you'll see on the screen now. One of the other pictures of John on the other screen was him and his officers. One was on his right is Mr. Robert Dyer, the tax collector. On his left is Mr. Norris Sill, the borough clerk, and Windsor Cooper and Mr. M.W. Foster. They were both council people at that time. That's Republican Club members gathered in the basement. Getting back to education, John's grandson, Glenn Jackson, has been a principal in the Winslow School District area for many years. Peter's son, Joseph, worked for many years for Camden County, and his daughter, Dr. Wilma Jackson Farmer, worked over the span of 50 years from classroom teacher to director of curriculum for Camden schools, but she also tutored students in Lawnside and served on several appointed committees from our Board of Education. She was also a consultant for New Jersey state testing and for several nationally circulated textbooks. Other Jackson descendants have been doctors, lawyers, social workers, firemen, policemen, and preachers, as well as teachers, all in areas of community development and service. Speaking of community development, it has already been mentioned that I became postmaster in the Lawnside Post Office. When I first began, I began helping at Christmas time. But then I became the postmaster. I started in 1952, just helping out in Christmas time. Our small office was rated 3rd class. We had a lobby full of lock boxes and people had to come pick up their mail every day. That's the picture you see of me sorting mail into the boxes. They didn't like having to come to the post office to get their mail when all around them they could see the postmen in neighboring towns delivering mail door to door. After investigating, I found out that an office had to have yearly receipts of $20,000 or more to become 2nd class and have delivery service. So after much complaining, Mayor Hilliard Moore and I in 1966 began a campaign to increase our receipts. We found that the men and women of Lawnside have been purchasing their stamps in the towns where they worked. By 1968, we were promoted to a 2nd class office and we had enough homes for 2.5 routes, which had to be set up with properly numbered homes. It was up to me to set up the routes, which were interesting because some people didn't want to give up their self-appointed numbers, which they had been using for years and years. Anyhow, on May 3rd, 1969, our delivery system was launched with 3 trucks and 3 carriers who had to be hired and trained. Several years later, the Postal Service came up with the 4 add-on numbers to the zip codes that we already had. So on several Sunday afternoons, I took my 3 little girls and we rode around Lawnside and we set up how those 4 numbers should go in the different areas. I retired in October of 1987, but after all these years, when I see the mail truck up and down, I still say, well, I got them started. Briefly, I'll mention another area of service, which in the community, which was the Lawnside Chronicle. And you'll see that on your screen. You'll see the masthead of the Chronicle. I was the news editor and filled in several other spots when needed. I still have several copies of the paper, reminding me of the unity and pride that was shown in the community back then. We had local news articles and news coming in from towns nearby. In addition to those, once a month we had church news, sports news, social news, a teen corner, a baby of the month, and a business of the month. Business ad brought in funds to support the paper financially. I don't know what really happened that brought an end to the Chronicle. It may have been just a shortage of time. Some of us were newly married and then setting up families. And then the older ones had businesses that they had to take care of. So I'll just say that I've been honored to talk about my family, but Lawnside has existed because of so many families just like mine. We are a proud family, cognizant of the town's rich heritage and respecting our core beliefs and strong religious backgrounds, which taught us to look to God for guidance no matter what the situation was, and to honor our elders and our traditions, which have been carried down from generation to generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Benson.
You're welcome. It has been my pleasure to take part.
Wow. If we were all in a room, and I would like to welcome all the panelists to the stage. If we were all in a room right now, I think everyone would be standing up, clapping for you, to just be here to hear your story, and Mrs. Higgs, stories of endurance and pushing to better the lives of all of the families that lived in Lawnside, and then your acknowledgement of all of the work of all the communities working together. Just thank you for sharing these stories. So before we move to the Q&A section, is there anything that anyone wanted to say before we move to the audience questions? Okay, so
I did have one final slide with links, but we can decide to put those links in a chat or someplace so people can access them. But I don't know what you want to do.
I think we can actually, let's share this, share the slide, and then you can just talk us through it.
Okay. Sorry, I'm clunky here.
No, this has been a beautiful program.
So this is resources and links. So they're linked to the Historical Society, the Benson History Museum. The Bensons have been sharing photographs with the community via Zoom on a monthly basis so that people can see some of these great pictures and other items that Reverend Benson has collected. There's also a link to contact Christine Miles, who's the Associate Director of Professional Development and Instructional Issues for the New Jersey Amistad Curriculum, NJEA Amistad Curriculum Project, and her email address is there. And then also Mrs. Higgs is involved with Shamel Jordan, another genealogist and researcher, in something called Visualizing the Past. And they've been doing a pretty exciting thing with helping people share community memories. And they send out surveys via SurveyMonkey to folks about different elements of life. They've done emergency services, and the next one that they're going to do and share is about education in Lawnside. And so they're going to share that at the next meeting. And I've also provided a link to the Scribe Video Center, where you can search for the films Mrs. Higgs has made on Mount Peace, A Haven to Freedom, and The Best Kept Secret. And then the Camden and Burlington African-American sites, African-American site map from Google can be connected. And this is something that Mrs. Higgs developed in working with the Haddonfield Education Association. So it's a really cool thing that young people can get on and then quiz themselves on African-American sites in these two counties. So that's what we have to share. And then we just love our little Miss Lawnside from 1923, Gladys Gibson. She represented the fire company. And she was also an athlete and a musician as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did she end up staying in Lawnside, or did she move away?
She moved away.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
I just wanted to mention, thank you for visualizing the past. Shamel and I have gone to different school. Well, we went to Lawnside School District teaching the history of Lawnside, and we are available to come to your districts if you need us to come and teach this history to students throughout the state, throughout the country. We'll go anywhere. Thank you.
Great. Great. Thank you. Thank you, Linda. That was a very important part to the presentation. So if it's possible, if you have the links available, you could post them in the chat. What we'll also do is I'll make a note that when we upload the program to YouTube, that in the description, we'll have those links available as well in the description part, so people would be able to click on them. So now I'm going to open up the floor to the Q&A. So it looks like someone asked Mr. Charles Williams, what did you find out about my family who ran businesses and lived in the Lawnside Arthur Williams family? So I think that was addressed to Muneerah Higgs, but I'm not sure. It looks like around 6:30.
Okay. Well, I do know of Mr. Poppy Williams' store on Warwick Road. And I don't know if he's a relative of his or not, but that was a staple in the community. And Mr. Poppy was also the truant officer of the town. And he'd run around the town gathering up those truant children. And he had quite a history in the town. Yeah, so I do know about that store on Warwick Road. It was a candy store, more or less. And we all went there all through our childhood. And perhaps this person is a relative. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add to that, but I do remember Mr. Poppy Williams' store and the truant officer.
Great, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I would add that Mrs. Williams has been given credit with bringing hot soup to the school when the school was opened up on Warwick Road and the lunchroom was not open yet. Mrs. Williams would bring big pots of hot soup in a wagon down to for the children's lunches. Also, one of Mr. and Mrs. Williams' daughters, Mrs. Helen Morales, was one of the teachers in the later years of the school who made a mark on so many of the children. She was one who had grown up in Lawnside, and so she was also able to teach them about the Lawnside history. And I know my daughters really enjoyed her English teaching.
Oh, okay.
Also, a couple of them were police officers, Leon Williams and Johnny Williams. They were police officers here in Lawnside. So that family has a deep history here.
Also, I should mention that one of the great granddaughters is Kate Russian, who is a professor at, Linda, maybe help me, the University of Connecticut, I think it is. So that whole family has a great history.
Yes, yes. Kate is a published poet, and
Yes.
And often returns to Lawnside for the Arthur Day that Mount Pisgah hosts every March. Or when they hosted it, I think they did it online. But I just wanted to point out that I have a picture here of Mayor Amos Rogers and council. And if you notice, this gentleman on the end here is this gentleman on the end here is Mr. Williams, right here on this side.
His name is George Williams.
That's right.
Yes,
George.
yes, George Williams. And this is a picture of the council meeting inside the school building. So.
Mhm. Also, I guess one other George Williams Jr. was the proprietor of the Esquire Cleaners, one of the businesses on Warwick Road for many years.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
So thank you very much for those responses. Someone asked, they said, thank you. Ronald Becker said, thank you for your outstanding presentations. Approximately what percentage of young residents growing up in the community remain in Lawnside as adults?
Not many.
I think it's hard to say that people do grow up and move away, and some of them move very far away, and some of them are in the general vicinity. Before the pandemic, we had something called Lawnside Heritage Day, which was kind of between Juneteenth and 4th of July, and people would come from as far away as Texas and California for that. So people didn't move away, but they kept Lawnside in their hearts, and so it's a really nice kind of a homecoming type of feeling. but there's a larger percentage of people who do move away. I myself moved away and for almost 30 years lived elsewhere.
Thank you. Someone had a question. I had a question about the Miller Funeral Home ran by Edward and Sarah Miller. Did you mean Carl Miller Funeral Home in Magnolia and Camden? I'm related to them, and the details you shared are similar to Carl as Sarah Miller, whose homes were in Magnolia and Camden. Carl's dad, Rutledge, was carpenter from Charleston, South Carolina. They are buried in Mount Peace along with other relatives. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Edward is the originator of the Miller Funeral Home. And if you see that name, Sarah, keeps showing up in subsequent generations. Mrs. Sarah Lanice Marvin, who's about 99 years old now, is a daughter of Carl Sr. So she's a sister of Carl Jr. So we're looking at the 7th generation of the Miller Funeral Home now when we look at Mrs. Dabney and the rest of the family that is running the funeral home now. But it was started in Magnolia, and yes, Carl, I actually have a picture thanks because of the close relationship between Dr. Roscoe Moore and the family. I have a picture of Rutledge Miller with a hearse that he built. So he built a hearse and on a truck platform. And it was white with the glass sides and the big headlights. And that name, Rutledge, was given among families. So I, Rutledge Bryant, is the father of the mayor, the senator, and a former deputy commissioner of education.
Oh, wow.
May have been named Rutledge in honor of Rutledge Miller, the Miller Funeral Home. So,
wow.
Yeah. I realize I'm on video as I started to jump up and get that picture, hold that up. So I resist the urge, but I can scan it and send it to people.
Great. So looks like Baba Zaid Muhammad from All Politics, our local radio, is saying, this is amazing and I loved it. How do each of you remember my great uncle, James Bryant? He was the mayor in the 70s.
Oh.
He passed in 1982 from cancer towards the beginning of his 4th term. He was my grandfather, Foss Bryant's baby brother. Love, honor, and respect to all of you.
Oh my goodness, that is just wonderful.
Wow. We knew him very well.
Yes.
Well, during the 70s, I moved out of Lawnside for 8 years of my life. And this was during, I moved out from 64, 65 up until 74. So I think that was during the time of, I knew of him, but I didn't have a kind of relationship with him because I didn't live in the town. I moved back and he was no longer the mayor at that time, but I heard great things about him, and how he moved our town forward. So, yeah.
Yeah, and once again, we have pictures of the council and panel with James Bryant as the mayor. It's a wonderful collection of photographs of the council in action, of them doing things. I know that when he passed, Joyce Gilchrist Pierce became the acting mayor, which would have been the first woman to actually serve in that capacity, although she wasn't an elected mayor. So yeah, there are a lot of people who remember Mayor Bryant.
Yeah.
So it's great to see people on here connecting.
And the relatives, it's great to see that. Yeah, the relationships.
One day we'll have to have a program called The Women of Lawnside.
I've got some ideas about some of that. So I'd love to see some of that kind of thing happen.
Yeah, that would be great. Linda, someone's asking, will the slides be made available or will we just have the video available?
We can try to make them available. That's a newbie for me. In terms of sharing the slides and putting them together with the audio. So if they're on the video, they can be seen while the people are speaking. Is that how that works or not?
Yeah, I guess
I'm not sure.
I was just asking if they would be available as a file.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think that's why we're so excited about sharing the video, is because then people have the opportunity to see them
Right.
along with the discussion. So
Right. Yeah.
We'll definitely share the video. I'm not sure if we'll be sharing the slides. We haven't shared any of the slides for any of the programs so far, but we will have in the description of the YouTube video all of the links that Ms. Shockley has provided here, so that when you visit it, you can also click on there. Someone by the name, so Marsh G. Smith had a question. Do you have any history on Lawnside relationship with the surrounding white communities when it was first founded? How was this new community seen by its neighbors?
Well, you realize that Center Township was dissolved because other municipalities were also incorporated. So not only did Lawnside incorporate, but so did Runnymede and some of the other communities. So it wasn't as though, to quote this article from the Courier Post in 1927, that the legislature of Democratic New Jersey found it necessary to create an independent Negro borough. It was that Center Township was dissolving. So people needed to make a decision. Do you want to be your separate entity, or do you want to be combined with another community? And actually Lawnside didn't choose its borders. The borders were chosen for it. And so de facto, it became a Negro community. But they had as many as 56 white households closer to what is now Cherry Hill, which would have been Delaware Township at the time. So, but yeah, there used to be a bus that ran along Warwick Road, and Mrs. Benson may remember this more clearly, but it ran along Warwick Road, and specifically it picked up women from Lawnside and took them into Haddonfield to do what my mother would call days work or domestic work. And so, and then it came back at 4 o'clock and dropped these women off in Lawnside, unless they had a lady who would come and get them at their homes and drive them back to their homes. But people in Lawnside worked in other communities. Mrs. Benson said her grandfather, did carpentry work in other communities, and people went to Philadelphia and worked as well. But that's a question for researchers to look at. And I know Rutgers University Press expressed interest at one point in looking at the dynamics of it. And as you saw, as I referenced in that other article, Mr. Bryant did mention cross burnings, and people speculated. I remember my parents speculating about who the cross burner was. Was it, the man who came here and sold fish, or, was it the insurance man, or, somebody who came here by day, but by night they were involved with the Klan. And Klan activity in New Jersey is well documented as well.
Yes.
Could I add, in Mount Pisgah's history, those people that were in the first church of Snow Hill, there were just as many Caucasian people as Black. And over the years, they left. But the Methodist Church in Magnolia, it was Greenland then, they were white. They were the first ones to leave. And then there was a group of Caucasians who left, And they just went one block up on the corner of Emlyn Avenue and built a small Catholic church. And after a year or so, they left, and they have a great big, beautiful Catholic church in Haddon Heights now, St. Rose. And I think that was maybe the biggest biggest group of Caucasian people who left. But we did have them, in the very beginning.
Wow.
And yes, I do remember what Linda's talking about the bus, because there was no work here for them in Lawnside and no businesses for them. So everybody worked out of town. And that's what I was saying about the post office. They didn't know, they bought their stamps in the big cities where they lived, where they worked.
And my mother caught that bus to Haddonfield. So she was a part of it. Yeah.
Okay.
It was a domestic.
Okay.
Mhm.
Wow. So many testimonies of resilience and persistence. This has been a powerful evening. Unfortunately, we're going to not be able to answer the rest of the questions in the Q&A because we're coming to the close of the program now. But I'm sure everyone joins me in thanking Ms. Benson, Mrs. Muneerah Higgs, and Mrs. Linda Shockley for their presentations this evening. We encourage you to visit the links that Linda shared, including the Visualizing the Past on Facebook. Please sign up for the mailing list with Lawnside Historical Society. They're also on Instagram and Facebook. And the New Jersey Historical Commission has also made our mailing list available, so you can know about all of these programs, but all of the programs and grant opportunities that the New Jersey Historical Commission offers. And as well as on travel and tourism, the Peter Mott House is included on Secretary Way's Black Heritage Trail, where you can find other opportunities and other sites, African-American historical sites throughout all parts of New Jersey. So again, thank you all for joining us for this program, and we will share the information for the recording so you can share it with your families and friends. And I would just like to wish everyone a good evening and a happy rest of the year.
Thanks
you.
so much. Thanks
Thank
so
you
much
so
to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.